Fetishmen. Oh, now we're recording. All right, we're recording. I might just say, I'm going to say Claire's introduction again, just to make sure that that gets on the intro. So we have Claire with us. Claire Bailey is the founder of the Nectarine Project, an organization dedicated to making tech policy more sex positive. She recently completed a Harvard fellowship studying sexual censorship on social media and is currently working as the VP of product for Lesbians Who Tech. Daly Barnett is a technologist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and she's also a member of the sex work collective Hacking/Hustling, or is it just Hacking Hustling?
You can call it Hacking Hustling, yeah.
Great. And also, last but not least, Ryan Olson is here. He's the co-founder of Fetishmen Networks and Real Kink, and he is a developer in the adult industry who specializes in payment processing and assisting sites and performers with compliance within the adult sector. So thank you, each of you, for being here. And now we'll get into our discussion. So my first question for each of you is, well, that was my cat knocking something over. She's a bit of a gremlin. You may hear her meowing later. So anyway, my first question to each of you is, where do you fit in the conflict between sex and technology? Daly, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I've been working, I've had like sort of like the two wolves mentality, right? Where like I was working in tech for a long time and like involved in the sex work advocacy world. And then when SESTA started to like roll out in like late 2017 and 2018 when it actually happened, that mobilized a bunch of us that sort of like towing the boundaries between those two worlds. And that really pushed me into the Hacking Hustling collective. And since then, that pushed me into working at EFF. And now I just continue to do work with content moderation, deplatforming, platform censorship, Section 230 problems, and like, you know, coding in the daytime.
Wonderful. Claire, over to you.
Yeah, I've been a techie my whole career. And also, it's always weird to say this, but I've been really interested in sex ever since puberty, specifically the kind of content in the media and the effect it has on people. And being a techie and being very online, I can't help but notice how it interacts or gets banned or doesn't interact, and the effect it has on people after that. So the kind of mental model I have for this is folks like Hacking, Hustling, and Daly think about sex workers as people and their interaction with these platforms. And what I focus more on is the content as its kind of own thing and how that interacts with these platforms and what policies they have around that. There's less advocacy around fighting for rights and more around fighting for value and effect and the ways that this content gets treated and how people think about it. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, great. I get the difference between, or, you know, it really overlaps. Like, people create content and content is treated kind of as if it isn't people, but like we're all flowing in together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Ryan, tell us about yourself. How do you fit in this conflict between sex and technology?
I didn't realize this till now. So it's funny. So Daly focuses on, as Claire said, the people aspect of it, and Claire focuses on the content perspective of it. And I really am the guy that focuses on distributing the content and what the payment processors and the banks and everybody will allow. And so for myself, you know, over the years, I've been into kink and BDSM and advocacy within the LGBT community. And also as a techie, I find that I'm most comfortable in the tech world. So when I started writing websites and writing subscription-based websites and models, I started realizing all of the compliance and difficulties and content prohibition and all of that stuff. And I started to really feel that I need to do more than just write a website. I need to be there to promote the positivity of sex and what it is out there and how that content shouldn't be discriminated if it's something that's consensual between two adults.
Mhm. Yeah, I really appreciate that you say that, because really, so we're the sex positive Democratic Club, and like sex positivity as we define it, like is really that sex when done between two or more consenting adults, and like the consenting and adults part are both extremely critical for it to be sex positive, is good and like a natural part of being a human being. And like this concept of deplatforming kind of treads on this idea that you can somehow remove sex and sexuality from the experience of being a human being. So what I want us to talk about next is that term. So we called this event Deplatforming Sex, and deplatforming as a concept may not be familiar to everybody. And like, I don't know that it really captures everything that we think about when we think about this phenomenon of people and content being banned or throttled or like shadow banned, whatever you want to call it, online. So can you each kind of speak to what you see going on that might fall under the umbrella of deplatforming? Whoever wants to go first, I can come on you.
I mean, I could speak on that. You know, with all like sort of tech things, it's rife with like too many like disambiguating terms. So deplatforming is like one way to describe what happens, but I don't think it's all inclusive, because there's also platform censorship, which can be, that's like descriptive of things that might be happening behind the scenes as well, where like deplatforming kind of refers to the platform or the application that the user engages with. And platform censorship can also refer to things that are more infrastructural in the internet. And then there's content moderation, which is like the actions that a specific platform takes to mitigate their responsibilities when it comes to enforcing their terms of service or community guidelines. And those all kind of, you know, those aren't like particularly discrete boundaries. Those are all kind of fuzzy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they blend over each other, but it's worth thinking about how a platform deals with its problems, or like an infrastructural service, like an internet service provider or a payment processor, differs from like Facebook or Twitter. And then when that Facebook or Twitter is just actively seeking out like individual pieces of content or types of content to suppress in some way, if it's removing it entirely or so-called shadow banning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, from the deplatforming side, I think it becomes very interesting that, you know, using somebody like Facebook, they have a bank and they have investors and they have payment processing, and all three of those have rules within themselves. And a lot of these platforms, they've taken the highway road of, well, nobody else allows this content, and we're not in the business of advocating for free and open expression. We're just going to live within the confines of what's already been addressed and what's already been defined for us. And between our bank, who says they don't want to allow this, and the payment processing that doesn't want this, and the credit card companies that don't want this, and our user base that doesn't want this, and religious groups don't want this, and so on, it makes it very difficult for us to share that content, and that type of behavior then trickles down as we get closer to the actual human person. And I think that's part of the issue as well.
Yeah, Ryan, I'm glad you called out all the different groups that kind of have a stake and have a stay in the, or have a stake and have a say in this. It's complicated, right? Everything we're going to talk about is. There's so many different places at which a decision or action can be taken, and there are so many different kind of people involved in this system. I talk more about censorship than deplatforming, but like, what does censorship mean when it's not a government, and who's actually doing it? One of the other things I talk about a lot is the difference between policy and implementation. Like Nectarine's tagline is to approve kind of the policy of tech companies and tech platforms, but they also don't match their policy. Like what actually happens on the platforms doesn't fucking match the policy. And on both sides of it, right? It's not like they're over policing or under policing. They're both at the same time, in really weird ways and sometimes, and in sometimes really obviously like racist and sexist and transphobic ways. Because there's the people at the company who set the policy. There's the people who report the content, because most content, it's not really obvious how content moderation works, but most content is not automatically banned at the beginning. Someone has to report it, which is an avenue, big avenue for harassment. And then there's the people who review the content and make decisions, and that process is also not transparent. And those people tend to be all over the world and not get a ton of training. So there's all these different places. I mean, the big obvious one is that every single platform has an exception for educational content, right? They're all like, yes, we don't allow sexual content, but education is great. We're liberal. We want people to know about that kind of thing. But there's a link to a article on how to use a condom on scarleteen.com that I use as an example a lot, because you can't send this link in a one-to-one private message on Facebook. Like, yeah. You can't.
People need to know this.
Yeah, it's in, if you go to Nectarine Project, I do a live demo of it in my video for the Harvard final presentation. I have been checking this like monthly for the last 7 or 8 months, and nothing's been changed. So when we're talking about like deplatforming, it's a lot of different stuff, and it is stuff like that. It so obviously does not go against policy, because you cannot get more educational than how to put on a condom, and yet it is blocked by Facebook.
And I think that, you know, this is part of where she talks about where Claire's talking about the moderation. These platforms used to do automatic moderation, and then that becomes a problem, and then they start hiring outsourced people to do the moderation, and then you end up with religious issues because, and I don't want to mention a specific country, but they look at certain content and they go, it doesn't matter if it's educational or not, our country doesn't allow it, so we're not going to let the world allow it. And then something like an educational link like Claire has on the Nectarine Project, they throw it into a filter that doesn't allow it to be shared anywhere, because somebody in the company has made a decision that this isn't educational, even though it was created for a Harvard educational purpose, and then you got to fight it. And how do you fight something that's always subjective? There's always a human person that's subjective to it. And that's where deplatforming has to happen. We have to accept that if you're 18 and you're looking at content, that's acceptable. And they're more worried about that 16-year-old person or that 12-year-old person that somehow looks at it. But what are we even teaching those kids if we're just teaching them that we don't want to see it in the first place?
Yeah. What I want to like say is that even our organization, the Sex Positive Democratic Club, experiences some of the downstream effects of this, where we can't invite an unlimited number of people. We are invite limited to the number of people that we can invite to our events, because we talk about sex. And I would argue that our programming is educational, and it's political, and it's not pornographic, and never gonna be. Like just like, where do we draw the line? How do we actually educate people about things that they need to know in this arena, when just having sex in the name like gets you knocked out? Like, it's very frustrating.
And this is where somebody like me, I can create a website, but when Facebook has millions of users to get a message out, and I create a website, how do you even promote the website if you can't promote the website on other websites?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do we build a community if the places that are specifically designed for community building ban our types of communities?
And it really is insidious on a personal. Daly can probably speak there than I can. But, you see a lot of platforms that remove accounts of sex workers, even when it's just their personal accounts. Like if the platform's somehow find out or connect that this person does sex work on another platform, nothing related to it, those accounts can still get taken down.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, I mean, as you pointed out, there isn't like a very clear, there isn't like a parallel distribution of how policy and content moderation enforcement actually happens on the platform level. And when it comes to like the platform, I feel like they're often being overly broad in how they affect the content moderation to avoid any sort of criminal liability. And that's because of things like FOSTA, this like very vague piece of law that carved out to Section 230 that removed this immunization that platforms had when it comes to material that could be aided or in some part tied up with human trafficking. And that, like, because it's so hazy and no one really knows what that means or how it could be, these platforms, in order to dodge any sort of liability, even the largest ones that could afford, you know, a slew of lawsuits, even though there haven't been any yet, at least under FOSTA, they just, you know, hit anything that could be maybe swept under that, like under that umbrella. So any sort of sex content of any kind, sex education, any people that they have deemed might or might not be a sex worker or involved in the sex industry on either side of the counter, and any profiles they might have anywhere are all, you know, best just to get rid of than deal with the legal nightmares of that.
That's when we lost Craigslist personals.
Right.
Exactly.
And, yeah, all sorts of places have been.
And now you look at places like Double List, where they ban the word hole because they don't want something, H-O-L-E. You cannot say the word glory hole on it.
Wow.
Because they don't want to be related with the objectification of a human being, because that is something that people are concerned about. And these types of issues are a major concern about how we treat decent human beings just being themselves and making a solid living in a great profession. And I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning her, but Hime Marie, she's a very good friend of mine on social media, and she just got banned from Instagram this afternoon because she posted a two-piece bikini photo. That I don't know about you ladies, but I mean, I'm on Instagram. It's Instagram, sorry. And I don't know if you know this, but a lot of women post two-piece bikinis, but because she's known as a performer, they banned her without due course, without anything. And that type of discrimination, and that's what we need to start calling it. We have to start calling it discrimination. We can't be nice about it anymore. We have to be treated equally. If they don't want to see nudity, fine. But we have to be able to be treated the same way as my next door neighbor and as the person down the street.
It really is just straight up discrimination, and it's hard to call out like that because it's not written in the policy that way. There's not a single person that makes a decision that way. But from looking at a lot of banned content, like the further you are from a thin, straight, white, young woman, the more likely you are to have your content taken down. So like larger bodied people have shit removed all the time, like stuff that's completely covered, stuff in two-piece bikinis, right, that you see thin people do all the time. Like you're so much more likely to get taken down. And some of that's bias in the content moderation, and some of it's just more likely to be reported by harassment campaigns, like I said.
And only because I'm the only guy here, I also want to say that if you're not at all a 6'2", 13 size feet, muscular man, you're not going to get far either.
It's true. Although I've seen a lot of, I think men being sexy is also more likely to get taken down than women being sexy from like a really dumb, like no homo stance, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Here's a question from the audience. I think it's like kind of relevant to what we're talking about right now. Do we have empirical evidence in addition to anecdotal evidence of that platforms discriminate on the basis of age, race, sex worker status, et cetera, in their moderation or deplatforming practices?
So,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Who wants to go first? Claire, I heard you say so first. Like,
yeah, my answer was going to be a little more equivocal than I think the other two. Because it's the content that's taken down, you cannot have 100% track. Like you can't go to this database and look at all this content because it is content that has been removed. So because it has been removed, you can't go keep track of it. With that said, though, Yeah, there are quite a few studies that I will leave it to Daly and Ryan to offer examples of.
Yeah, Daly,
You, Daly, this is more of your world.
I'm well, kind of. I mean, I'm not the one conducting the research right now, or at least in that part, but I would look to people like thinkers like Timnit Gebru, recently fired from Google, or like the entire Data for Black Lives Festival, who has like paneled a slew of researchers that point out specifically like how moderation algorithms reflect very racist biases. And it paints an example of how any sort of enforcement of these things is going to reflect the biases of its creators or of the society in which it's like built up. So you can imagine that like this is a vastly intersectional network of bigotry that is coded into the platforms that we're engaging with.
I love that as a quote, a vastly intersectional network of bigotry.
good.
Yeah, sorry to paint a very
That's going on my wall.
Yeah. So what can we do to kind of fight this? We have another question from the audience that they want to know like what kind of policy would you all like to see put in place to protect sex positive content and producers?
I think we need to see a start. And I think that there has to be a level of objective decisions being made. For example, I'm very, look at the other side of the pendulum. If they don't want to see, and I'll use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, pick one, they don't want to see nudity, fine, no nudity. But if you're going to ban someone because they're in the adult space for a two-piece bikini, then you need to ban that Christian mother with her 3 children sitting on the beach in Palm Springs with a bikini. Like that, you can't judge the two, and there needs to be some policies that are set in place that say, if you're going to ban this picture because you believe it's something, belief doesn't matter, subjectiveness doesn't matter anymore. And there are tons of technical tools out there like AWS recognition, Google. Why do I always forget the name of it? Google Vision, where there are very clear ways they can look at images and say, okay, this is nudity, we're not going to allow this, but this isn't nudity, so we're going to allow this. And they need to start using those, unfortunately, objective AI tools to start making these decisions, because humans, we've all got an opinion.
I would maybe like throw this back to Daly. Do you believe that algorithms can actually be objective in a way that humans can't?
Sure. Yeah, but honestly, I'm less interested in an enforcement of policy of any kind. Whether we're talking like state policy or legislative policy or policy on the platforms, we have the policy for freedom of speech to continue online, and I'm interested in that. We have Section 230. We should protect that. That's great. That just means that people are responsible for their own actions or content or words online, not the platform or internet service provider that funnels it to the internet. And as
Not
far as
everybody might know what Section 230 is. Like, I'm familiar with it, but I don't know that everybody here would be. So can you give us a brief, like, just overview of what Section 230 does?
Sure. It's actually a very brief, very brief little piece on the Communications Decency Act, which was an act passed in 1996 to sort of regulate how like indecent material could exist online. And then this part was amended to it or tagged onto it to say that individuals are responsible for the material that ends up online. So like the user that creates the thing and not the platform or internet service provider or intermediary.
But we have to be careful though, because Section 230 is only an American standard or American law. Canada, Australia, the UK, globally, everybody has a different way of looking at this. I mean, if you look at somebody like Japan, they handle this whole situation completely different than the way we look at it in North America. And so I guess where I always come back down to this is I can no longer think about the legislative aspect of it, because the truth of the matter is, if I don't like what a country is doing, I can move my website and my business to another country. I can still be located in Canada, but my business can be registered in Ireland if I wanted to.
Mm.
And unfortunately, we can no longer look at legislature from a municipal, federal, state, provincial, whatever you want to call it. We have to start looking at it from the platform's responsibility, and how can the platform make changes globally that it's going to force the trickle down effect, right? So if Facebook were to say, and forgive me for being blunt, fuck you, America, we're going to move to Canada, and Canada says, oh, you're bringing all this business, what legislative rules do we need you to make? And, you know, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we'll allow this. How fast do you think Americans would all of a sudden change their laws? You know, it really comes down to the platforms have to start using their money, and they need to start seeing the money value of allowing this deplatforming of censorship and discrimination.
Sure.
I agree. It's
I would say that, oh, sorry.
no, please.
I was just going to add on there that, like, I agree. There should no be like international like uniform law that dictates how the internet should be. That should be up to a nation state to decide, with some exceptions. But as far as like the platform specific platforms, the only policy I'm interested in that any platform enacts is a transparent one. As Claire pointed out, there is very little transparency in how terms of service and community guidelines are actually affected, or how the content moderation reflects those documents. And whatever they do, I want it to be transparent so that the users have the choice, and that fosters a market of competition that will, you know, empower the platforms that the people want.
That sounds like it, like an actual potential policy ask is to create legislation that requires platforms to be transparent about how they do this content moderation, or decisions about who and who can't be represented on their platforms. So thank you. That's actually something that we might be able to work on. Claire, I think you had something to add.
I have a very different direction to take this question. Ryan, you said something at the beginning of your statement that I actually really disagree with, and I want to bring it back up. You're like, Facebook can block nudity, and that's fine. That's their decision. I don't think Facebook should block nudity. I think Facebook should allow nudity in sex. For me, legislation is important. It's a thing to consider. But for me, the win would be to convince people that sex is important and that exposure to sexual content and sexual information is a good thing to protect. Now, I can hear the devil's advocate in my head being like, you want to show children porn. I'm like, no, I don't want anybody to watch porn that doesn't want to watch porn. Like, consent is important above everything else. But Twitter does this, Reddit does this, neither of them perfectly, but there are social media sites that have pornography and nudity on them. And they do this with opt-in filters and things to confirm you're 18 and hide it from the people that don't want to see it. Why isn't that everywhere? I don't know why certain platforms made the decisions that they did, but I would love to have a chance to convince them otherwise, because I think any attempt to try to separate sex out from the rest of life really just harms us all.
And I want to be clear. I agree with you, Claire. I think, just to be perfectly clear, but I also have to look at this from a capitalist side, you know, where if you don't want to allow it, don't allow it. But then we come back down to the whole, I want transparency. So if you're not going to allow it, just say to me, don't come here unless you're a conservative Christian. I'm not going to be on your platform. But if you're telling me you're open to everybody and you put up your wonderful Pride logo in June, and then you tell me I can't be in my little, you know, Speedo sitting on a nude beach, you know what? There might be some discrimination here.
Mm-hmm. Something that I'm hearing, this did not come up really in our prep conversation, but one of the things that people talk about is Facebook like a public utility? Like the fact that it is advertises this space where anybody can be who they are. And it's so ubiquitous that like, if you're like being not on Facebook, for example, is difficult, and it kind of precludes your ability to organize, for example, politically organize. Like, have any of you like thought about how or if we can make something like Facebook a public utility, and would that help in this context?
I don't think it would. The question of whether or not it kind of qualifies as a public utility is a really interesting one that I've had some good discussions about. The companies are doing a pretty bad job of self-regulation in this space. I think the government would do a worse job. Like, I don't trust Congress more than I trust companies to deal. Oh, well, we got Sesta Fosta out of them. Like, no, I'm not going to give them another chance for a while. So to me, that question's a little moot, because I don't think that we should hand this off to the government to regulate.
All right, so
I would have to
Go ahead.
it's it wasn't built, it was built as a product. It's not built as like a piece of like civil infrastructure. Just because it has vast market power doesn't mean that it is. Sure, I would love more regulation over it, but I'm not talking like necessarily legislative regulation. Maybe not to sound too capitalist, it's not necessarily my personal point of view when addressing these conversations, but I am interested in the idea of tech competition. And so if we allow regulatory powers just to be how people choose to engage with a platform that is more reflective of their personal views based on a very transparent enforcement of policy, we'll end up with a more maybe hopefully democratic tech world. Very utopian, but possibly.
So I'm hearing some like antitrust, bringing antitrust law into this to make a more democratic marketplace. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I'm no legal expert. I work with many, so generally, yeah, I do side with any sort of enforcement that fosters competition. I think that like disables me or any sort of, or any perhaps like legislative power or something from making decisions for people without their consent. If this is like, you know, a conversation about consent, I think that empowers a consentful model of technology.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I like the framework of a consentful like approach to policy, be it like legislative or corporate. So I want to, you know, I think we've talked quite a bit about social media, and I also want to talk about banking, because this is another place in which like deplatforming, as we kind of have it broadly or fuzzily in this conversation, really impacts people. So I'll throw this question to Brian to first. Can you talk about the impact of this kind of morality policing in the banking industry, and like who's affected, and if there are possible solutions? Share those.
I'm taking my moment. It's fucking bullshit. Taking my moment. You know, I don't understand this. I mean, I buy a book and it's got the F word on it. And this company can go ahead and they can sell that book 1 million times and put their money into a Bank of America, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo account, and they don't think twice about it. But the moment somebody wants to create porn, or they want to do something that is not Christian-like, now there's all these policies and everyone's bouncing it to the other person. And like I've said at the very beginning, if it's not Visa saying we don't want somebody to wear diapers, it's the payment processor that says they don't want to be attached to this, or their bank that does the payment processing on their behalf says we don't want to be attached to this. At the end of the day, why are we again still being so subjective? If these people are working legally, why are they not being treated the same as somebody like myself who's a developer. Now, I have to tell you something. I'll give you a prime example. I don't have a PayPal account. You know why? Because I own an adult business and they don't want to be attached to me. So my clients can't pay me through PayPal. And it's because they're American. And I'm willing to grab my cell phone and pull up my LinkedIn profile, and I'm connected to the former, at the time, current president of PayPal Canada. He is a colleague of mine, and I couldn't even get him to fix this for me. And his response is when he took it to legal, because he went to legal on my behalf, I've got the messages. And his response from PayPal, their legal team was, but what if he were to sometime maybe use it once to receive a payment for a personal service as opposed to development needs? And that's discrimination. And they know there's a nightmare there, because if all it's going to do is they're going to piss someone off in Canada, and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is going to get in the way. These American rules that you guys have with your banks, we don't have those in Canada. If you have a legal job and you're making legal money, the law is you are required to have a bank account. Nobody can refuse you a bank account. Now they can limit it, like you put a check in your account, it's held for 5 days and blah, 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 but they can't stop you from having a bank account. And they tried once with a company I know 5 years ago that opened up an adult website, and they quickly got squashed. They have a bank account and they're allowed to do full global banking. What you guys go through in the US, I don't get.
Yeah, it's a really sex negative culture. And I think that banks look at the fact that prostitution is illegal, or, and say, like, we don't want to get anywhere close to that. So they put really big walls around it. It is.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but these new fintech banks like Revolut, I encourage all of everybody in the adult industry, go open up a Revolut account. Look at my link in bio. But seriously, go get yourself a Revolut account. They are governed under EU and UK law. Now, while there's some screw up laws in those regions as well, they allow adult workers to work on their platforms as long as you're not using it for direct adult services. But if you're getting paid from a production company, that's legal tender to them. If you're paying somebody outside of this new Texas law, but if you're paying somebody to create content with them, they're not looking at it from sex, they're looking at it as in you're paying for something that is legal. And in the UK, that type of stuff is relatively legal. So I encourage people, go look at Revolut. You still get a bank card, you get US details, you get UK bank details, you get, I think you actually get Australian bank details for instant payment. And I strongly encourage people to look at the fintech world, because they are looking at this from the money perspective, not from the discrimination perspective.
It's really good to know. We got a question from the audience, and I just want to say, like, we're open to Q&A, so send in your questions. We're kind of transitioning from my prepared questions and bringing them in as people send them in. So send in more questions. And we got one question that was that Warren has a plan to, or Senator Elizabeth Warren has a concept to use the USPS as a bank. And the question is, would this solve this issue? Would it make it possible for people in sex and sexuality industries to have their banking through the USPS?
I don't think it would solve the problem, because banks are only part of it. The next one is the payment processors and the credit cards, and how do you get money into your bank account? And those are kind of a whole different kettle of fish. Like, as we saw, MasterCard and Visa have tremendous power here. They always have. We saw this with the anti-Pornhub thing. They were the kind of big actors. Like, when they pulled out, that was credited as a victory by the religious groups that were trying to kind of be very anti-porn in that sense. It's also, I don't know, it's interesting when you think about the fintech world, because there are some people that are distributing themselves across the world so that they can be in different areas and have different policies. And then you also see Stripe and Square and Google Pay and Venmo and all these other big places that have increasingly restrictive policies. Like, sure, yeah, you can't pay for illegal services in there. That makes sense. You can't buy sex toys in that. Like, you can't. I've been going to a lot of online burlesque shows during the pandemic, and you have to be careful not to like use certain keywords in Venmo payments so that they don't pick you up as like you're tipping a stripper. Well, they wouldn't care about me; they care about the stripper. And so it's not just the bank accounts. It's getting the money to the bank accounts, and those places, like it's just all these different points along the pipeline are super restricted.
Makes sense. Daly, you look like you had something to add.
I mean, I would agree with what Claire said. I was just nodding along that, yeah, like any sort of anything that is more, I know this is like, again, another not very discrete category of things, but anything that's more infrastructural, like a payment processor or like Visa and MasterCard, these places that kind of have positioned themselves as unique choke points in the system or how we survive online. They shouldn't be the moral arbiters of what is and is not allowed. So when they pull out from Pornhub, that's not their job as like an infrastructural service within the internet, you know? It sucks.
Well, and it comes back down to the same thing that I talked about earlier, diapers. Or, you know, I got a better one, person-to-person water sports. If you are a website that your business is located in North America or your payment processing is in North America, you cannot have one person pissing on another person. But if your business is located in Europe, that's allowed. And Visa sets that rule. Visa, not the banks, not the payment processor, Visa. Visa says we don't want to piss off our European customers that are into some crazy things, but in North America, because of our religious zealots and our religious fanatics, we have to block more content for them. In North America, there's 1,200 words that I have to block on any given website, and some of them are contextual, like the word forced. If you use the word forced a certain way in North America, it's not allowed. But if you use the word forced in Europe, that could actually be considered positive enforcement. If you use the word, what was the other one? The other one was intox. You cannot use the word intox, intoxicated, intoxicating, or anything involving altering the person's mind in North America, but some of those words are located and allowed in Europe.
Wow. I think this gets to a question that we had, which is like, what are the legalities of this, and like, how is law interrelated with corporate policy? Because we're getting down to the key words that are banned, and these are, my understanding is that these are choices that are being made at the corporate level, but supposedly they flow from law. So can you all talk to that?
They don't flow from law.
Oh.
A little bit. Like if content is violating copyright, then it's going to be flagged like immediately, right?
Some copyright. It's pretty hard to enforce adult content copyright.
Sure, some. Yeah, depending on the copyright holder, of course.
Can of worms.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is why I'm not a lawyer. I just work for them. So like copyright is a big one. That's like, you don't have like freedom of speech when it comes to, taking copyright and spitting that back out. Or like under FOSTA, this very gray area of what is or is not aiding and abetting human trafficking. Could be anything sexy online. So those are examples of like higher legislative policies that trickle down to us. And, as we've said again and again and again throughout this panel, the platforms are usually more broad in avoiding any sort of liability that might fall under that.
And then again, like I said, so I don't want to throw one of my payment processors under the bus. I want to so bad though. One of them, Visa sets a rule, and then the bank has to follow Visa's rules. and Catella Bank is the bank that I'm thinking of. So then they set additional rules because there's things they don't want to be attached to. So Visa doesn't want to be attached to certain things. And so everybody follows that. And then the bank doesn't want to be attached to certain things. And then the payment processor I'm thinking of, they have to follow both of theirs. Plus they have their own things they don't want to be attached to. And then it's even worse because now we're just talking about the types of content. Well, now we have to talk about what you're allowed to sell and how you're allowed to sell it and what pictures you can put with that. And so if you look at somebody like, if you put something like, I'm trying to think of two sites, Fort Trough, they are primarily gay website for toys and stuff like that. They post videos of like sex scenes and somehow they're processing credit cards. I don't know how, God bless them, but the next site, like Hello Kitty, I don't know which one, I can't think of the name of the kitty site. They can't even put videos of a woman holding a toy. Everything has to be all done on white screens because their payment processor doesn't want to be attached to the, it could be actually used for sex, even though they're a sex store. It's crazy. There's no consistency. And everybody has their own rules.
There are 4 things that you can pretty consistently regard as like not allowed. And in general, I'm not aware. My research, the 4th, anything sex related that involves blood, feces, animals, or children. The last 2 are actually illegal. The first 2 are just really likely to get you in trouble. Beyond that, there's no consensus. There's not even a federal nudity law in the United States. It's state by state, and states disagree widely amongst jurisdictions and judge to judge. And obviously US and Europe have very different ideas of what constitutes nudity. And what the fuck is a female nipple anyways? Sorry, that's a huge pet peeve of mine. So the general like 18 plus thing, although even that age is different across the United States. This whole United States of America thing makes stuff really complicated when the internet exists. It varies widely, and you see people who pick the most conservative states to do lawsuits. And so there's a lot of federal law where they explicitly try not to write the federal law to be like the most conservative viewpoint. And yet, now that the internet exists, you essentially have that because the groups that want stuff down will just go throw a lawsuit against a website from the most conservative district that they can find.
Interesting.
And then I repeat, bring your business to Canada.
This whole thing is actually just an ad to transport
for Canada. Well, considering that we're the San Francisco Sex Positive Democratic Club, we're trying to look like, what can we do? And I think that some of the things that I've heard is we can fight for more transparency in how corporate terms of service and policies are actually applied. We can advocate for, antitrust law actually to be used in this space to create more competition in the marketplace so that we don't have these behemoths that really kind of get to make their own rules. And maybe someday we can have like an online bill of rights that includes sex and sex positivity as part of your human self-expression. So I'm saying that because we're at 6:56, and I promised, especially our East Coast folks, that we would be done by 7 p.m. Pacific time. And I want to give you an opportunity to like say any final thoughts that you have, and to also plug anything that you'd like to plug, upcoming events or places on the internet you'd like people to visit you. So let's do that now. And Claire, I'll call on you first for that.
Sure. I'd actually love to add one for people to do. And like, you live in San Francisco, I'm going to make a wild guess that some of your members work in tech or tech adjacent fields. Continue to be personally sex positive. Like, so much of what has led to people in tech, like it's setting these policies and all of that, is like sex negative culture, maybe them personally hold sex positive views, but like we don't talk about it, we don't discuss it. And the more that we can get better as individuals, the more we get better as a community, and then the more we get better as companies and policy. So especially living where you are, like continue to be you, work with this club, and do what you can. And also check out Nectarine Project. I write about this stuff a ton. It's nectarineproject.org, Nectarine Project on Instagram, or Nectarine Project on Twitter. I think Rebecca added me, so you can find it that way instead of trying to figure out which vowels I dropped in that.
Yeah, and if you want to type those into the chat, I believe the chat does broadcast to attendees. Ryan, where do you want people to find you on the internet, and any parting thoughts?
You know what the truth is, I wouldn't worry about finding me on the internet. I'm happy to just be who I am. If you really want to, you can find me on Twitter at RealGayRedneck. You can also find me, that's pretty much the best place to find me if you need me for anything. Real Gay Redneck on Twitter, Real Gay Redneck on Instagram. That's where you'll find me. Again, I encourage people, get out there, be honest with yourself, be true to yourself. Don't hide who you are as a person. If you want to be sex positive, get out there and be sex positive. There is nothing that's stopping you from being happy for who you are. And it doesn't matter if Facebook or someone else tries to censor you, you can find another way to be loud and proud. And definitely, again, support your organization, be there for everybody, and advocate from yourself to your friends, to your family, to your work. Just get out there and speak about being honest about who you are.
Thank you. And Daly.
That was beautiful. That really touched me.
Thank you.
I would say to fight for your own digital privacy and security, fight for your community's digital privacy and security. That can do wonders when it comes to skirting around how policies are enforced on you. It's a cat and mouse game. You, the user, are the first one, usually. I would go to EFF.org to find out more information about how we defend digital civil liberties, and the Security Education Companion and Surveillance Self-Defense Guides at EFF.org to learn more about privacy and security, and hackinghustling.org to learn more about how Hacking Hustling is advocating for sex workers in the tech space.
Wonderful. And thank you. And if you can type those into the chat, they'll be broadcast out. And then finally, once again, since you're here, if you are not already a member of the Sex Positive Democratic Club, please become a member. We can really use your support. And the more people that we have on our membership rolls, the more clout we have in the San Francisco and in the state Democratic parties, and those roll up to the federal Democratic Party. So we want to show that there's a lot of us here who actually care about these things, and make your voice heard by becoming a member. So thank you to Ryan and to Daly and to Claire for being here with us tonight. I really, really appreciate your time and your expertise in this area. And I hope you have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Becca.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.